We all know the Orbea Rallon, the Basque brand's enduro race-winning bike.
But it's had a wild new update. An update so progressive, it smashes the argument as to whether a enduro bike is a mini downhill bike. But why?
Well, the covers are off and we have not one, but two new bikes. We have the Rallon Enduro and we also have the new Rallon downhill bike.
Let's find out all the cutting-edge tech on these game-changing new bikes. We touched on the gap of enduro closing the gap with downhill. So, could one bike do both?
Well, no. Although the gap between the two disciplines is closing, I think they still just have very, very different requirements.
But with these new bikes, could we be proven completely wrong? Orbea have created a new platform that should work, they say, for downhill and enduro.
Whoa, Owen, you're getting carried away here. Enduro bikes have very, very different requirements. They need to be strong enough for a big day out on the hill, but they also need to be able to pedal up the hill and have a great pedal platform whilst descending.
Whereas for a race-focused downhill bike, we need big travel and we need to have supple suspension that works on small hits and big hits. And for racers, for those subtly different tracks, we also need adjustability.
Okay, so they both have different requirements, but at the end of the day, they both have to go down the hill flat out. To do that with one chassis, now that would be pretty special.
So, here it is, the new Rallon Enduro. And the name is the same, but the bike is very different. The Rallon model for Orbea has been around a long time, but it really hit its stride around the same time that the EWS set the benchmark for enduro, around 2013. And this bike is dedicated to enduro, but it is a really different beast from even the last iteration of the Rallon. In terms of travel, we're up to 170 mil of rear travel. We've got it paired to a 180 mil fork. Then there's lots of clever stuff with the suspension. It's a modified 4-bar with this concentric rear link. Then the suspension gets really interesting. You can't quite see it, but effectively we've got a special little link plate in here that means that there's lots of adjustability. On this Enduro model, it's a 4-position setup, so we can change the bottom bracket height and the progressivity of the suspension system independently. So you've got 4 different positions. And the adjustability continues. As stock, it's got a 63.5 degree head angle, pretty slack, but you can make it 0.75 a degree slacker or steeper as you wish. The reach on this large is 475 millimeters, but it is really low slung. And one of the reasons for that is this really diddy little seat tube that allows you to run a really long dropper post. You could run a 240 millimeter dropper post. There's the option of running mixed wheel size. Whilst this one is set up 29/29, you could run it with a 27.5 rear wheel. There's also 2 different chainstay lengths available. There's a 450 millimeter and a 442, so there's lots of adjustability on this bike. And both wheel sizes work with both chainstay lengths. Nice. It is a proper enduro bike too. We've got a bottle cage and Orbea's locker, which utilises down tube storage. So we've got a little bag inside that you could put a tube, CO2s, maybe a pump. It's really nice to have. But there's one little extra secret that this bike has got, just low slung in here. We've already talked about how we've got this clever little mounting system for the bottom of the shock that operates and changes your bottom bracket height and changes how progressive the suspension is. But you can also add weights to it, really low slung and low down on the bike. Why would you add weights to your bike? Well, it can play a critical role in balancing out the sprung mass versus unsprung mass. So having a bit more mass on the main frame can actually help your suspension work more efficiently and more effectively. It's also fully featured because we've got this really handy little mini tool just in the main pivot. Clever. As you might expect from an enduro race bike, it is a full carbon fibre frame with only this suspension link here being aluminium. Some other nice details on here too is the cable routing, which you can run either side of the head tube, and both of them slide into tubes within the frame, so it means that they just slide through nice and easily. As you might expect on a modern enduro bike, the back end spacing is 148, which is pretty standard for an enduro bike. The seat angle on this large size frame is 78.5 degrees, so it is really steep, and that should put you in a really good pedaling position for those steep enduro climbs. The new Rallon Enduro is available in 3 different models, but all of them share the same carbon fibre frame. Starting at €5,499, you get a mostly SLX build. It's very nice, but you can step up to an XT build for €6,999, or to get this bike with the Fox Neo and wireless drivetrain, well, it's going to set you back a little bit more. €9,999. And as with many Orbeas, you can customise lots of these different specs with a Mayo option, choosing different components and different paint jobs. Orbea don't have a long history in downhill, but they do have a long history. They've been around since 1840. They've been making mountain bikes since 1989, and they've been making race-winning bikes, well, for a while. And they've been making race-winning bikes in cross-country for Catherine Pendrell and Julian Absalom. They've won World Cups, they've won World titles, World Championships, and even Olympic medals. And in Enduro, with Martin Mays, they've created a winning bike. And in EMTB and E-Enduro with Flo Espargaro, they've created another winning bike with the Wild. But downhill, up until very, very recently, was missing from their palmares. I say recent history because just last weekend, Tahnée Seagrave won her debut World Cup race on this Rallon DH for the Orbea FMD team.
She's faster by 0.4 of a second. Tahnée Seagrave is up in impossible conditions here. Tahnée Seagrave nearly gets sent over the front of the bike. Tahnée Seagrave goes fastest at Biasco Biava by 1.7 seconds.
How do we get to this radical new design? Well, we can blame Martin Mays. Yes, the downhiller and enduro racer for Orbea is key in this new design. He raced the old iteration of the Rallon in a downhill race, Lords, put dual crowns on. It was actually pretty successful, but things really started to gather ground and gather a pace last year in Fort William. We saw Martin Mays on, well, what looked like their Wild EMTB. It's an EDRE winning bike. So this new bike, it was very different, but it was just a test mule. It was testing out suspension kinematics and some of the clever stuff underneath the hood, changing where that mass is and how you can change the bike setup. How did this test mule go? Well, in Fort William, it raced to 21st place. That is a mean feat, just in general. And Martin Mays at the time was a full-time enduro racer, so switching between the different codes of racing was impressive. But this mule continued its development, and Martin raced it again at the World Champs in Andorra, placing it 20th. Again, no mean feat. The development cycle sped up greatly when Orbea and FMD Racing merged to create a new super team. With this super team, they got racers like Tahnée Seagrave to input their insights and all that racer knowledge to help create these production bikes. Orbea have been using a modified 4-bar suspension linkage for over a decade, using their own dedicated concentric link. And it means that they're able to, well, play with all the different kinematics that make a suspension bike work. So the anti-squat, the anti-rise, and the rear axle path. And for these two bikes, the Enduro and the downhill, they've had to, well, lean into where you need that suspension most. So you want plush, deep travel on the downhill bike, and actually on the Enduro bike, you need that too. Now, previously, this would have led to a bit of a paradox of having a bike that can pedal well but still absorb all the trail chatter, be that big or small. And it would have, well, potentially left a bike being a little bit mushy under power without the anti-squat that you require to keep the bike standing up as you're pedaling along. Orbea have always been at the cutting edge of technology, and on their top-tier enduro bike, they're speccing the newest and the latest in electronic suspension. And it should mean that this bike can be both really pedalable and absorb all those big hits and trail chatter. Downhill is arguably where mountain biking started, and the premise is simple. It's a time trial where rider and machine race down a hill, but it's anything but simple. And modern downhill, that is evolved hugely. We've got incredibly tough courses with huge drops, big jumps. You still have to pedal, you still have to keep and maintain speed. It is technically challenging, and riders need, well, a machine that can handle all of this and adjust to their individual requirements. Starting with the frame. It is the same full carbon frame as the Rallon Enduro, but there are some subtle and some bigger differences. We'll start with suspension travel. It's got 200 mils of paired travel front and rear. We've got a similar head angle. It's 63.3, and it is, again, adjustable by 0.75 a degree. You can make it a little bit steeper, you can make it a little bit slacker. It's got a very similar setup down here where we can change the lower suspension link and we can change how progressive the suspension is. We've got two different chainstay lengths. So you can have a 450 where you've got more stability, a longer wheelbase, or you could have the shorter 442mm for a little bit of a tighter back end and a more dynamic ride. We should also mention about the rear hub, because that's quite interesting for a downhill bike. On the Enduro bike, we've got that 148, that pretty much standard boost rear end. Well, the downhill bike, that gets the same. It's interesting because lots of downhill bikes have maybe 157, a new Super Boost standard, or some will have an older 150mm spacing. But this new Rallon DH sticks to, well, a good standard Boost 148. The tricks that the Enduro bike had about playing with unsprung mass, well, those same tricks apply here. So under this clever cover, we've got some additional weights that you can add. There's 3 different weights to change that sprung versus unsprung mass to optimize your suspension system. Not something I've seen on any other downhill bike, and that's, well, a micro tool in the main pivot. It's a really nice detail. Likewise, we've got a bottle cage and the locker. And you might think, well, it's a DH bike, I don't need those. But actually, if you're riding in between the tapes and you're racing, well, agreed, you don't need it then. But I imagine a lot of people are riding DH bikes at bike parks, and even when they're racing, they might need, well, a snack for the uplift or some tools to do some adjustments. So having a setup like this is really useful. There's one model in the Rallon downhill range, and that's this one that you see here. You get all of this wonderful XTR and Saint componentry for €7,999. It is a high-end Orbea, so that does mean that you'll have the Mayo option as well. You'll be able to tune different components and choose different paint schemes. So, have Orbea managed to create one bike that can do both enduro and downhill? One bike to rule them all?
Well, I think they've delivered one platform that delivers on both disciplines.
OK, so one adjustable, adaptable bike that, well, can be tweaked for the needs of an enduro racer and a downhill racer. Interesting. If you're interested in this and you want to know more about the incredible development story of this, Neil has done an incredible video on GMBN, so tune into that. Plus, what are your thoughts on these bikes? Let us know in the comments down below.